Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome in to another new episode of The Lager Line, served to you as always courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbox Brewing. I'm your host, Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and a contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. For today's episode, we've got a special interview show coming your way from Toyota Center, which is where our guest works most days. His name is Clay Allen. He's the general counsel of the Rockets. And as far as basketball goes, you may know him best as the man who is often in the actual NBA draft lottery room each May, or at least those Mays in which the Rockets are involved, as they have been the last 3 seasons. There are very few people who are physically in that room at the NBA facility, and Clay has often had to carry both the honor and pressure of that distinction. Clay, thanks so much for taking the time to chat. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Ben. I'm doing well. Great to be here with you.
Let's start by, if you could, explaining to our listeners a bit about your career background. Tell us how you got to where you are today, because I know you've been with the Rockets for 20 plus years, but of course, transition to general counsel took some time, obviously years in law school. Just talk about your trajectory over the last couple of decades and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I started with the Rockets in 2001, right out of college. I didn't have a job lined up when I graduated. I was just looking for something to do and came across a posting on Rockets.com for a part-time position. It's called marketing associate, which is essentially a team of 30 to 40 part-time employees that serve as the execution arm for the marketing department. So they go out and help out with player appearances, community events, our big kind of marquee events like the Rockets Run, Blacktop Battle, Tux and Tennies back when we did this, which has now become the Rockets Runway. So I did that for 6 months or so, and that turned into a full-time position, kind of on the planning side, now running the marketing associate program. Stayed in the promotions department for 6 years and then decided I wanted to change. Wanted out of marketing. I was just looking for something different career-wise. So I decided to go to law school. Spent 3 years in law school, then became a corporate lawyer, worked at a law firm for 3 years. And just as I was looking for the next move in my career, I got a text from a friend who still worked at the Rockets saying that the associate general counsel at the time had moved on and needed to apply for the job. So I emailed Tad Brown, who was the president at the time. I was like, hey, I'm a lawyer now. I'd love to interview for the position. And he got back to me and said, yeah, we'd love to have you in. Went through the full interview process with Tad and Rafael Stone and a few of the other executives at the Rockets and became associate general counsel in 2013 and served in that role until 2020 when Rafael moved over to the general manager position and I was promoted to general counsel. So I've been doing that for about 2 years now.
So as you mentioned, Rafael joined the Rockets in 2005 as general counsel and progressively took on a few more basketball operations tasks. He's had a very unique career in that regard, going from strictly the legal side of the organization to progressively more and more basketball ops until taking the full-on GM position once Daryl Morey left in 2020. So I know that's a fairly unique, I guess, career path for an NBA GM, but I've got to ask it. Clay, what do you think the chances are, if we're chatting in 15 years, that somehow you've transitioned from general counsel to general manager of a basketball team?
I would say slim for me. I enjoy the business side of basketball. Rafael had more of a basketball background than I did. He played in college and was an ear for Daryl Morey for a long time and kind of worked his way up on that side and gained the trust of Daryl Morey. I'm a huge Rockets basketball fan. I grew up in Houston. I was in high school during the championship years. But as far as NBA basketball, I'm basically just a normal fan. If you asked me to name, 5 players on the Timberwolves, I probably couldn't do it. So gotcha. I love basketball. I love Rockets basketball, but I just don't have the expertise that Rafael brings to the job as far as general manager concerned.
Fair enough. So, besides the quality of your work, one thing people may have heard about you if they know the name Clay Allen is that you're openly gay, and that makes you one of a relatively small number of openly gay executives working in professional sports. And I find that noteworthy with the Rockets because there is a lot of diversity in the forward facing leadership roles of the organization. We were just talking about Rafael, and between Rafael and Ime Udoka, new head coach, formerly Steven Silas, and the same applies to him. That's one of the only GM and head coach pairings in which both are African American in the NBA. You've got Gretchen Shearer, who's president of business operations, one of the only women in that role in the NBA, and I believe in sports. And of course, they've got you as general counsel, one of the higher ranking sports executives who is openly gay. So, having watched sports when you were younger and being in something of, I suppose, a minority demographic, how important do you think that type of representation is when it comes to, I suppose, setting the tone for future generations? What message do you think that sends?
Sports is kind of stereotypically and historically such a macho kind of industry. And
Hmm.
by looking back to when Gretchen and I were growing up, there weren't any women in leadership positions. There weren't any members of the LGBTQ community in leadership positions in sports. In fact, Rick Welch was the first executive in sports who was the president of the Warriors. He came out with what 10 or 15 years ago.
Hmm.
So I think as more and more people of color, women, members of the LGBTQ community take on these leadership roles, we're telling young people who are looking to work in sports or even to play sports that there are opportunities for you in sports, that they're not going to be the only one or the first one. Other people have done it before. I mean, I think it's especially important in basketball because it's a sport that's dominated by Black athletes. So that we have a general manager and a coach that are both Black, I think is important. It helps them relate to our athletes in a way that maybe a white general manager or a white coach couldn't. But it also tells these future GMs, these players who, when their career ends, want to become coaches or general managers, that that's a route that they can do, that is open to them. So I think it's really important. We've done a great job here at the Rockets. Gretchen's not the only woman in leadership. We've got several people of color in leadership. So proud and excited about the framework the Rockets have laid on our executive team.
Let's go back to your job and let's talk about within the general counsel position. Well, let's get more specific. What kinds of cases and tasks does that handle, at least on the NBA side? I know you've got things involving Toyota Center, as you mentioned earlier. In terms of the NBA component, I know one, you're often in the room for the NBA draft lottery. I mentioned that off the top. I'm also assuming that you have a role in terms of looking at various contracts and the legalese of things that happen on the transaction side. Just talk, if you could, about within the NBA scope, the types of things that you handle in your current role.
Sure. I'll start by saying that I'm a transactional lawyer by trade, which means that I don't go into the courtroom and argue in front of a judge or a jury.
Right.
I predominantly draft, review, revise, negotiate agreements. And that's what I did at the law firm, and that's what I do mostly here for the Rockets. So on the basketball side, that includes player contracts, coaches' contracts. But Rafael and his team are the ones who negotiate those contracts, and they send the terms to me, and then I put them together in a contract. On the player side, there's not a lot that you can manipulate. The contract is a form that's set forth in the collective bargaining agreement. So, salary and term and some incentives, those can be negotiated. And Rafael or somebody on his team will send those over to me. And I'll generally check to make sure that the salary, falls within the NBA limits. If it's a max contract or if it's a veterans minimum, just make sure that it's complies with the rules. They always do. Eli and Rafael are really good at making sure those numbers comply with the rules and make sense. And then on the business side, I do things like draft sponsorship agreements. For example, for a jersey patch with Credit Karma money, drafted that agreement. Agreements for people who have suites. And then I guess the final big area that I do, and I'll just say I do every kind of legal matter that comes in the company, whether or not I'm an expert in the area. If I'm not an expert, I We hire outside counsel to help out. But something unique to the Rockets and to a basketball team is compliance with NBA rules. The NBA has a manual that's 800 or so pages that really sets forth all of the rules concerning basketball and the business of basketball. So it talks about things like the width of the paint on the sideline of the basketball court to isn't supposed to stand behind the goal when the opposing team is shooting free throws, to what types of sponsors are permitted and aren't permitted. So anytime anyone throughout the organization has a question about NBA rules, they turn to me and I pull out my NBA Bible and look up the rule and help them interpret it.
Have you gotten to see the new collective bargaining agreement yet?
I have not officially seen it. I've seen a summary of it, but I haven't seen
Right.
the full text yet.
So you're still waiting for the new 1,000-page document, I'm assuming, of whatever they just negotiated.
Yep, I am. And I've seen the summary and kind of a summary of the material changes. So that's nice. At least we
Okay.
know what to expect.
By the way, does it help you that your general manager, and when I say I mean the Rockets, of course, has a law degree? Because I have to imagine Rafael is one of the only GMs in the league that comes from that type of legal background. I assume there's a few others, but not a lot. You tend to see a lot of GMs come from more the basketball playing ranks and more of a professional background. I'm assuming that Rafael, knowing a lot about, I suppose, transactional terms, that probably makes things a little bit easier for you.
Yeah, like the CBA over the years has just gotten more and more complex, and it's really very similar to interpreting a statute, right? That the government might put out. So I think a legal mind, having that analytical training and the understanding of how to interpret statutory language and really make the language read the way you want it to read. I think that's helpful that Rafael has that legal background that he can interpret the CBA. And he's got at least one other person on his staff that has a law degree as well. So they are very good at interpreting the CBA. And like I said earlier, when I'm double checking their math or their player contracts, there's rarely a mistake, and there rarely a term that I don't agree with.
And I suppose that's something potentially of an organizational advantage in that when you have so many legal minds, perhaps it eventually will help you maybe take advantage is the wrong phrasing, but utilize the CBA to the best of the organization's abilities. I would think that having that type of legal expertise, it certainly can't hurt, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's an advantage for the Rockets to have that legal mind on staff on the basketball side, particularly because the CBA is drafted by lawyers and it's interpreted by the NBA by lawyers as well. So to be able to have people who are also lawyers negotiate with them and discuss with them when they're talking about player contracts is definitely helpful.
So let's talk about the NBA draft lottery specifically, because of course that's coming up 2 weeks from when we're recording this. To peel back the curtain, this is midday on Tuesday, May 2nd. The draft lottery is going to be Tuesday, May 16th in Chicago at the NBA Combine. Of course, it's a big deal for the Rockets, who finished with the second worst record in the NBA this season after being in the basement the last 2 years. So the Rockets do have maximum odds at securing one of those 4 lottery picks. We're going to go into the nitty gritty of what that day is like. But I think a good place to start, Clay, if you could, for any listeners who aren't familiar, just explain why it makes sense for a general counsel to be the in-room representative. And actually, before you do, let me clarify. I think a lot of people who just watch the NBA draft lottery each year, when we say the team's representative, they think of the person who's on stage, which the last couple of years has been Rafael. And of course, that's the big televised spot where they're doing the countdown from 14 to 1 of the teams who didn't make the playoffs and where they're going to draft. And of course, it culminates with the 4 lottery picks. That person is not actually in the room. They are learning it in real time, the same way we are as fans and media members watching on television. backstage, there's a different group of people, and I believe it's one representative per team. They've let in a few media members from time to time to oversee. There's an accounting firm, a couple of NBA executives, and so on and so forth, where the actual drawing takes place. And that's where you are. That's where you'll be this year. That's where you've been the last couple of years when the Rockets have landed the second and third picks that led to them getting Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. So just tell us at a high level why it makes sense for a general counsel to be the person who's actually physically in that room where everything is going on backstage.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The way you described it, it's a bifurcated process. The actual drawing happens in a back room. They call it the drawing room. One representative per team is invited to come and observe the drawing, and then the more visible televised portion happens up on stage, on camera, and that's where Rafael has represented us. But in the back room, I think the NBA essentially does this because of all the conspiracy theories about, frozen envelopes or teams getting preference, just so that it's clear to all of the teams that it is a fair drawing, that nobody is advantaged or disadvantaged over any other team. And I think the lawyer makes sense to be in there because we can view things, so we can kind of evaluate risk, make sure that everything's above board. Similar to the reason they have an accounting firm who's the one that that views it all and that classifies that this is the correct order of the drawing and that type of thing. So I think having a lawyer there makes sense. Although I've been there the last 2 years, this will be my third year, and there's only been a handful of other lawyers in the room with me. So
okay,
each team makes their decisions, I guess, for different reasons. I would say there's also a little bit of a ceremonial aspect, right? It's not like in a wedding when somebody right before the vows are said stands up and says, "Hey, I object." None of that drama happens. Really, we just kind of all get in to make sure everybody has eyes on it and everything goes swimmingly. And it really doesn't matter if it's a lawyer or a marketing associate, for that matter, as long as somebody's in there to view it. I think that's probably enough.
One of the things that historically, you mentioned the conspiracy theorist, and people go back to the whole frozen envelope theory with, I believe it was Patrick Ewing in 1985. And then in the 90s, they had, I believe, lotteries that were determined by ping pong balls with logos of the various teams in the lottery that were supposed to be weighted, of course, by their record and the slot they were entering the lottery. Now that we're in the 2020s, this is really sophisticated. And I think not everyone recognizes just how layered it is now, the process. As I understand it, there's basically 4-digit combinations that they draw four of, first for the first pick and then all the way down to the fourth pick. And then, of course, after the 4 lottery picks, they draw the remaining 10 slots in that lottery range are determined by record, with the team with the worst record drafting higher. That's why the Rockets with the second worst record are guaranteed going into the lottery this year. Since they won the coin flip San Antonio, the worst that can happen is pick number 6, because the worst they could be is the second worst team amongst the non-lottery winners, since they were the second worst team in the NBA this season by record at 22-60. So I guess where I'm going with this, the 4-digit combinations makes it really, really difficult to fix, even if you wanted to. And of course, I know you have observers, you have the accounting firm, but I just think when we're talking about drawing 4-digit combinations, I think if people understood that more, I think they would recognize that this is not Patrick Ewing and the frozen envelope theory. This is something that would be pretty hard to fix, even if you wanted to, right?
Yeah, it's completely different than the image I think a lot of people have in their minds. You see the envelopes on stage, but that's just ceremonial. We don't see any envelopes in the drawing room at all. What we see is essentially a lottery box. If you've ever watched like the Mega Millions drawing on TV live before, there's a clear box with ping pong balls bouncing around. And unlike in the 90s, as you were referencing, ping pong balls with, a team logo on it, there are 4 balls are drawn, and then that 4-number combination determines which team gets the draft pick. So there's 1,001 different combinations. If number 1,000, or if combination 1,001 is drawn, then they redraw that one. So essentially 1,000 different combinations, and each team has a certain number of number combinations. So for the Rockets, it's going to be about 140 number combinations. So there's definitely no way to do a frozen envelope. I guess you could do a weighted ball, but still the weighted ball is only going to affect kind of that number,
Hmm.
and still wouldn't guarantee that the right combination would come out. So
Right.
I do think it's very, very exceedingly unlikely that there's any way it could be fixed.
Hmm. When I think about the number combinations the last couple of years, one of the interesting aspects from this system that they've chosen is that, in theory, a team can get picked multiple times because the way it works, you draft those four balls, or I guess you pull them out of the hopper, and each team has a lot of combinations. For example, the Rockets last year were in the number one slot. How many different four-digit combinations did you have, ballpark?
Yeah, I think we had 140 or so out of 1,000. We've got
Okay,
a sheet in front of us
right.
where, as they're calling the numbers one by one, we're like frantically going through the sheet of 1,000 numbers trying to figure out if that combination belongs to us.
Right. And I want to say, I remember last year when Orlando ended up getting the number one pick, didn't the Rockets have like the first three of the four digits, something like that?
Yeah, you can start to narrow it down. So when it's the first three, I was like, okay, all we need now is one of these two numbers and it'll be us. And it ended up not being us and being Orlando. And I immediately knew that it was Orlando and not us. In fact, knew before it was officially announced by the NBA and leaned over and said, I think that's you guys.
Yeah.
But we were really close. One of my favorite things about the drawing room is they actually draw in order, not reverse order. So it's one, two, three, and four. So the drama is
Mm,
like it's very, very short. So 2 years ago when we got Jalen Green, we weren't the first number, but we were the second number. So within 2 minutes, the pressure was off. I was
yeah.
relieved that we had been chosen and moving on. But yeah, those first few times when the numbers are laying your way, you're waiting for that last number. It doesn't fall your way. You're like, ah, crap.
And
Okay, got
yeah.
to try again.
And you can also win twice because, as you mentioned, teams, especially at the top of the lottery, have like 140 different combinations. So even if you get pick one or pick two, they could theoretically draw you again for pick three or pick four. Now, of course, they're going to throw out that result and redraw. But I think that happened one of the last 2 years, right? In that, you got two or three, and then you ended up getting three or four as well.
Yep. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And to me, I'm like, oh dang, I wish that could have been one and two instead of three and four, but we'll
Right.
take what we can get. But the NBA quickly put all the balls back in. They're just like Rockets will draw again, and then they
Gotcha.
didn't. There were no congratulations that the Rockets theoretically could have gotten two draft picks. It was just kind of moving on to the next
Yeah.
your business like.
Have you ever seen it where they had to draw like multiple times after that? Because I'm picturing a scenario where they keep drawing and then the teams at the top are weighted so heavily. Well, I guess they're not weighted as heavily after 2019 with the revised odds to try and, I guess, disincentivize tanking. But have you ever seen like three, four times that they keep having to throw out results?
Not in a row.
Okay.
There definitely have been multiple times throughout the drawing of the four draft picks. We were chosen twice, and I think another team was chosen twice. On the next pick, but not three or four in a row.
So walk us through the logistics of that day. Historically, I believe for a long time they had the drawing in Secaucus at NBA headquarters. Now they do it in Chicago because that's where the draft combine is taking place, and a lot of the executives and staff members are there anyway. So it just makes sense to do it at a hotel, convention center, what have you there. But I know the NBA keeps this under strict lock and key. And for example, the people who actually go in the room, the security to get in is nuts. Like, you're obviously not allowed phones because they don't want you to reveal the result in advance. They don't allow any contact with the outside world. I'm guessing there's no bathroom breaks because theoretically that could let you outside of their containment. Just explain what the logistics is like in terms of, I guess, 2 weeks from now, Tuesday, May 16th. What's your day going to be like? What time do you have to get there? What do you have to give up to get in the room? And what's everything going to be like until they actually do the TV reveal, which I think is about 7 or 7:30 Houston time?
Yeah, so we show up at about 5 or 5:30, check in at a main desk, and they've got a little reception, really for everybody, for people who are going to be in the drawing room, and then also people who will be on stage. And then by 5:30, we actually have to move into the drawing room itself. there, yeah, you have to take off all of your electronic devices. So you've got a watch, you've got a phone in your pocket. If you, for some reason, brought an iPad, although they ask you not to bring it. Jonathan Fagan of the Chronicle told me last year that they took his audio recorder, just like old school, like tape recorder.
Yeah.
And so you put all of that in an envelope. They put your name on it and lock it away. You go through a metal detector to make sure you're not hiding anything, and then you go in the room. Yeah, it's hardcore. Then you go in the room and kind of just make small talk for half an hour or so.
Yeah.
Meet the other team reps. Like you said earlier, there's media in the room, so media will come up and introduce themselves, ask a few questions. At this point, they don't know who's got the top pick, so they don't go very in depth. I think they're just kind of feeling out so that afterwards they can do the longer interview. And then at about 6 o'clock, they do the drawing. The drawing itself is pretty quick. There's an MC, a master of ceremonies, who welcomes everybody, and then there's like 4 or 5 NBA staffers who do it. So there's the guy who draws the ball out of the hopper. There's a timekeeper who faces away from the hopper so that he can't see which ball's rising to the top. And then every 10 or 15 seconds or something, he calls for the next ball to be drawn. There's an announcer who officially announces which team has won the pick. There's another person who writes on a board which team has won the pick. There's NBA security in the room. There's an independent accounting firm in the room. There's NBA IT. There's somebody from the lottery company itself in case the lottery hopper malfunctions. They have a backup hopper there. So the drawing itself is just kind of 15 minutes or so. We're all seated on tables. The last couple of years, we haven't been the first pick, so I've just kind of followed the lead of the team that wins the first pick. If they jump for joy and cheer, I told myself that I was going to jump for joy and cheer when we drew. But the last couple of years, the winner of the first pick has just kind of done a little fist pump or a smile, and so I just followed that lead.
More subdued.
Yeah, exactly. And then after the drawing, we are stuck in the room until after the televised portion on ESPN is finished. So we have to sit in there, make small talk. For an introvert like me, that's always a little awkward. I'm like,
yeah,
I need to go introduce myself to people. So since you can't, play on your phone or do anything really to distract you, media members will come up and do more in-depth interviews at that point, particularly with the teams that got the top picks. Then they bring a TV in so that we can watch the ESPN portion televised, which last year in Chicago was just down the hall, but we couldn't be in the room because they didn't want us to tip anybody off.
Yeah.
And then as soon as the ESPN telecast ends at about 7:30, then they release us. We go gather our things, and most everybody heads over to the telecast room to meet whoever their on stage person was, shake hands, congratulate everybody, that type of thing.
And I'm assuming that these days, the security of that room is even more important in terms of not tipping the results because of the increasing prevalence of sports gambling. Back in the day, for television purposes, of course, they want the surprise factor for viewers. But now there's so much money potentially at stake if word got out in advance of what the order was. I'm assuming that makes it all the more important that the league has to keep it incredibly secret. As you said, the metal detectors, the whole 9 yards, making sure that it is a room almost designated survivor style that nobody gets out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Sports betting, obviously, that would have huge implications if somebody was tipped off from the room ahead of time. You mentioned earlier about the bathroom breaks. They put a spread of like refreshments, like water and sodas and a few snacks, and nobody touches them because nobody wants to have to go to the bathroom. And I don't actually know what the protocol is to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
I don't want to find out. So we just kind of all sit there and dehydrate ourselves so that we don't have to be escorted to the restroom.
Good point. I'm assuming 2 years ago had to be especially dramatic for you. Certainly every year the draft lottery is important. This year you're looking at top prospects. Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, Brandon Miller are the guys projected near the top of the 2023 draft. And of course, the Rockets would love to land one of those top 3 picks, which they have a slightly better than 40% chance of doing, I believe. But 2 years ago in 2021, the stakes were insanely high because of the pick swap right that the Thunder had if the Rockets were not in the top 4. So as it turned out, the Rockets were 52% to be in the top 4 and keep their pick, or in the 48% world where they didn't, they weren't just falling to 5 or 6, they were falling all the way to 18. And so it would have been a big teardrop in terms of going from the top tier, someone like Jalen Green, to someone in the back half of the first round. So I know the stakes for the organization were pretty high. It worked out very well with Jalen Green, but I'm sure it had to be so tough for you in that room, knowing that things were okay. Did you want to sort of almost by osmosis tell Rafael when you saw him on the stage, it's going to be okay? Or did you sort of enjoy putting him through the misery of, not knowing and going through all that stress?
It definitely crossed my mind before I went up there, like different ways I could somehow send a message to Rafael. But I concluded before I got in the room that there really wasn't any way to do it. I did want to kind of put my head down in relief when we got the number 2.
Right.
Just like kind of all of the pressure of the day and kind of the trip up to Secaucus, and there's not much to do in Secaucus. It was in the middle of COVID, so I had like nothing to do during the entire trip except for worry about losing this pick.
Yeah.
So personally, I was so much pressure had come off of me once we got the number 2 pick. But I had determined before I got in that room that there was no way I was going to be able to let Rafael know.
Yeah, at this point, I think the organization should be pretty happy with your luck, because when you look at the math of the last 2 years, I crunched the numbers of the odds of a team getting in back-to-back drafts a top 3 pick one year and a top 2 pick the next, with the revised lottery scheme, which again is meant to disincentivize tanking. So teams at the top, their odds are not that much better than teams in the middle to back half of the lottery. It's a little better, but not nearly as much as it used to be. The correlation between being bad and getting a top pick, not quite what it used to be, at least one of the 4 lottery picks. Now, of course, if you're bad, you are guaranteed of not falling lower than, say, 5, 6, something like that, as we referenced earlier. But to actually get one of those 4 lottery picks, and especially get in the top 3 or top 2, that's pretty rare. And when I crunched the numbers, to get a top 2 one year and a top 3 the next, even being the worst team, which the Rockets were, and having that number 1 odds slot, or I guess tied for the top odds slots with 2 other teams, your odds of being top 2 and top 3 in consecutive years are just 11%. So all in all, I know there's a faction of people that say the Rockets were the worst team in back-to-back years and didn't get a number 1 overall pick. But when you actually look at the numbers, I feel like you have to look at it in the organization as well. Like, you were pretty much a good luck charm, because a top 11% outcome, I mean, you have to be pretty pleased by that, right?
Definitely pleased. And when we were talking about who was going to be the drawing room representative this year, I was kind of up to letting somebody else have the honor this year. But somebody on the executive team, Gretchen maybe, pointed out that what the odds have been, that it's only 11% odds that we would get a top 3 pick 2 years in a row. So I've been deemed the good luck charm. So happy to go again and try to make it 1, 2, 3 over 3 years.
So I was reading a story in The Athletic last year after the lottery, and it talked about your physical good luck charm that you bring with you, with regards to a speech from Rudy Tomjanovich that traces back more than 20 years now to when the Rockets were retiring Hakeem's jersey. And of course, you mentioned getting your start in the early 2000s in a different role within marketing. I'm sure everybody, or most people that are in that room, given the enormous stakes, bring something with them, a good luck charm, if you will. Obviously, yours has panned out, at least to a large extent, getting a number 2 and a number 3 the last 2 years. Explain what your good luck charm is, and are you bringing it back this year?
So in my previous life in marketing, and I think I was a marketing associate back then, so a part-time employee, although it might have been right after I was promoted to full-time. We were retiring Hakeem Olajuwon's jersey at Compaq Center, and Rudy Tomjanovich was one of the speakers, the main speaker. And at the end of halftime, one of my duties was to take the podium off of the court and move it backstage. And I just noticed that Rudy had left his notes on there, so I kind of left him there. And at the end of the game, Rudy hadn't come back to claim the notes, so I folded them up kind of along the same lines that Rudy had folded them up to put in his pocket. I put them in my pocket and took them home with me. I've got a twin brother who also was in high school when the Rockets were winning championships, a huge Rockets fan. So I gave the notes to him, just kind of, I knew that he'd appreciate them. And he framed them and put them up in his house, and they've been there for 20 years since. So when I was thinking a couple of years ago about what I could use as a good luck charm, that came to mind. I was like, that would be, a great, really great good luck charm that would make it'll make good sense, particularly because Hakeem Olajuwon was a top draft pick for the Rockets. So I asked him if I could borrow the notes, and the last 2 years he's allowed me to borrow the notes. I've folded them up and put them in my coat pocket, and they've worked all right the last 2 years. So I'm going to give it one more go this year.
Awesome. Yeah, you certainly can't complain about the results when you look at it from a math perspective. I know superficially there's some that look at the record and say, well, the Rockets deserve a number one pick after 2 and now 3 consecutive rebuilding seasons. But when you actually look at the math and the system the NBA put in place, the new one in 2019, the Rockets have been pretty fortunate the last 2 years. And if they're similarly fortunate this year, I don't think anybody is going to be upset at all, or at least they shouldn't be. I know there's some hashtag pray for Victor folks out there, but at this point, if you get a top 2 or a top 3, I think you should be fairly pleased by that outcome for the Rockets and what it means moving forward. Clay, as we wrap up, is there anything we haven't talked about as far as lottery day that fans might want to know? I think the point of this episode, at least from my perspective, is to try and peel back the curtain beyond just what people see on stage and show, I think, or tell what happens behind the scenes and the mechanisms of how all this actually happens. Is there anything we haven't covered that you think is important that a fan might want to know?
I think we've covered it all. Just one last kind of statement on the chances that we get a top pick. Obviously, number one is the goal, and I'm going to do everything in my power. I'm going to rub those notes, anything I
14%.
can to, yeah, exactly, to get that number one pick. But we actually have almost a 50% chance of choosing fifth or sixth,
Yeah.
Which would be unfortunate. But the NBA really has weighted the odds to disincentivize teams from tanking. So yeah, the goal is definitely number one, but if we can land in the top 4, I think we'll be pleased. I definitely want to stay away from the fifth or sixth pick.
Yeah, and fortunately, you can't be 7. You already had some good luck by winning the coin flip against San Antonio a couple of weeks
That's
ago,
right.
right?
That's
Yep.
right. The good luck has started, so hopefully it
Yeah,
rolls on in 2
exactly.
weeks.
Now, of course, it was a split. You did lose the tiebreaker involving the Clippers pick. That's what the Rockets got in the Eric Gordon trade. Clippers were tied with the Heat and Warriors, and the Clippers finished last among those 3 teams. But with the way the NBA works and how top heavy it is, you'd gladly, if there's a trade to be made, you would trade losing that draw to win the higher draw, which the Rockets did with San Antonio. So hopefully that's a start, and the same holds true when the draft lottery takes place on May 16th. Clay, last
Absolutely.
question. We've been talking about the Rockets and largely the draft throughout this show. I know you mentioned off the top that you're a fan. It's not like Rafael when he was the general counsel and he had such a specific basketball background that led to him progressively taking on more basketball operations tasks and eventually being a GM starting in 2020. I know that's not you, but I also know you enjoy basketball. There's a reason why you've worked with the organization for 20 plus years. You're a fan. What do you think about the state of the team right now? They've got an accomplished head coach now in Ime Udoka. They've got a promising young core, those number 2 and number 3 overall picks that you helped land the last 2 years, Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. Got some other promising young players, Alperen Şengün, Kevin Porter Jr., Tari Eason, all drafted in the first round. Well, KPJ was drafted by Cleveland and then traded to Houston, but a first rounder nonetheless. All of them are 22 years old or younger. You've got all this salary cap space this summer. You've got a decent amount of future draft capital headed Houston's way from Brooklyn in the James Harden trade. Where are you at as a fan about the prospects moving forward? Because I know the last 3 years have not been pretty at Toyota Center, but also I think that when you look at the recent hire, you look at the cap space, you look at the young core, there's a lot of reasons for optimism. I think it's a large part of why Ime Udoka chose to come to the Rockets when that deal became official last week. So where are you looking at the Rockets this offseason and starting this fall?
I think you said it. I'm excited. We've got a great foundation of really young players with a ton of potential. We've got the cap space to add veterans now. And I mean, this team could be good for 10 to 15 years with how young our players are. So I'm excited for a bright, really long future of exciting Rockets basketball.
Excellent. Folks, that is Clay Allen, General Counsel of the Houston Rockets. Clay, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Ben.
Absolutely. And that will do it for today's episode of The Logger Line. If you want more content from us before our next show, the best place to get it is on Twitter. I'm on there at Ben Dubose, and the show is on there at The Logger Line, where you can find our link tree. And that's got links to obviously our distribution partners, Apple, Google, Spotify, so on and so forth, but also our sponsors and partners, Sports Talk 790, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Carbach Brewing. Just hit up the link tree at The Logger Line on Twitter, and you can access all of the content and goodies from our friends, sponsors, and partners. With that, we will adjourn. For Clay Allen, I'm Ben Dubose. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.